Welcome to WizeUp. I'm Paul Arthur, tackling the abortion debate today. Yep. You know what? What do Canadians think about abortion? Okay. I mean, there's some variation, I guess, from, province to province and so forth. When is it okay to have an abortion? Should there be limits? Why or why not? Okay. Is it okay for any reason or at any point of gestation? Do late-term abortions happen in our nation? We're told that they are extremely rare, but is that actually the case? Going to find out about that today. Before we dive in, a quick reminder to hit subscribe, and we appreciate if you tell your friends about us as well. Our guest today joining us from Calgary, Alissa Golob. She is the executive director of the pro-life group called Right Now. They are a political group as well, in one sense. Their website is itstartsrightnow.ca. So Alissa, thanks for taking time for us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You bet. Before we dive in, why don't you give us a bit of background? What is your organization Right Now all about? How do you tie in with the political end of things here?
Yeah, so we're the political arm of the pro-life movement in the fact that we are solely focused on nominating and electing pro-life candidates. So every time there's a provincial or federal election across Canada, we have various candidates that we tap the pro-life movement into to help door knock, make phone calls, or just simply vote for that nomination candidate so that they win the nomination, they tip the scale in that person's favor, and then go on to win the election so we can exponentially increase the number of pro-life politicians in both provincial and federal legislatures.
Okay, there you have it. Right now. Okay, now, you've been in the news lately. Word got out that you did some undercover videos, and we're finding out where Canada is at with late-term abortions. What is the truth? So, first of all, what are the laws in Canada for viewers who aren't familiar with our laws or lack thereof in this nation?
Yeah, well, Canada is one of the only countries in the world with absolutely no laws on abortion. There's no restrictions, no regulations, no nothing. So the only thing that we really have to go by when it comes to abortion is how a person is defined. And in Canada, a person is defined when they're fully emerged from the woman's birth canal. So logically, you could have a 9-month-old baby and a finger or a toe or any part of the baby is left inside the woman's birth canal, that 9-month-old baby is not legally considered a person until they're fully emerged. So that kind of leaves a legislative void on the abortion issue, which means that, you can have sex-selective abortions, abortions based on the baby's gender. You can have late-term abortions. There's so many different cases where things are happening that the majority of Canadians would disagree with and do disagree with, polls show, but that still happen in Canada just because there are no laws or regulations.
Okay, so the question is then, do late-term abortions happen in Canada? And I guess there is some admission from politicians and the pro-choice people that they do, but it's rare. So what did you discover? Does it happen?
Yeah, so this was something politically that we have been dealing with for quite some time. And when we do raise the issue of late-term abortions, we were constantly being told that they do not happen. And if they happen, it's solely for medical necessity. So on the Government of Canada website, in fact, it says just that late-term abortions only happen when it's for medically necessary situations. So I wanted to know if that was truly the case. I have been working in the pro-life movement for 15 years, and part of my experience in the pro-life movement has been working with abortion-minded women. So women who are considering or have considered abortion, and whether they went through with that abortion or they changed their mind before they went through with the procedure, I knew that late-term abortions were happening, and I knew they were happening for medically unnecessary reasons. But that was purely just personal testimony of the women that I have worked with. And so I decided to find out for myself once and for all if these abortions do happen. Now, a lot of people on the other side will say, well, there's no such thing as a late-term abortion. That's not a medical, term. And I'm just using that colloquially because that's what the Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada, they're the pro-abortion kind of activist group in Canada. That's how they define late-term abortion, and that's any abortion after 20 weeks. So the earliest born baby ever has been born at 21 weeks. So a late-term abortion is anything after 20 weeks, the majority of time when that baby is viable. And so I decided to go undercover in 4 abortion clinics across Canada in different provinces, and very late in my pregnancy, between 20 and 24 weeks, and find out kind of what they're telling women at that stage of pregnancy. In each of these appointments, I talked about how I was undecided. So I was on the fence, 50-50, because I wanted to see, would there be an option later on? Would there be any kind of coercion or anything like that was involved? There's a lot of different elements at play that I kind of wanted to see how they would respond. And so, yeah, I mean, at each of the clinics that I went undercover to, I was regularly told that even though I was on the fence, that didn't matter. I still had options. I had options well into the 3rd trimester. That would mean having an induction abortion. So I would go to the abortion clinic that I was at. They would inject the lower abdomen with a drug called digoxin into the fetal heart that would stop the fetal heartbeat. I would go back to the clinic. They would make sure the fetus is dead, which is a direct quote from the Montreal nurse. And then they would send me to the nearest hospital, and I would have an induction and give birth to the dead fetus. And again, that was a quote from one of the nurses at the abortion clinic. So
interesting terminology, because it's hard to, if this thing isn't alive, how can it be dead?
Exactly. I mean, in multiple clinics, I did ask about fetal development. In the one clinic in Calgary, she was very much like, yes, there's a skull, there's fingers, there's toes, was very direct with me. In the clinic in Vancouver, she said that there were human shapes. And that was at the latest stage, right? That was like a couple days away from 24 weeks. So that was 6 months of pregnancy that she was telling me that there's shapes. So different answers from different people, but fetal development was something that I kind of wanted to see how they responded to as well. But yeah, so they would just send me to the nearest hospital. At the Toronto clinic, they said up until 30 or 32 weeks, it was very possible. And she said, quote, "The system certainly doesn't think it's too far." And then she said at 34 to 36 weeks, it might be impossible for someone to find someone to do it, but she never said it was impossible. Another kind of side effect of this was in the Vancouver clinic, because I was a resident of Alberta and not of BC, the only late-term induction abortions were reserved for residents of British Columbia. But again, she said, don't worry, you still have options. And she went into how I could actually be sent to either Seattle or Colorado, so to the United States, to get a late-term abortion fully covered by the government.
Oh, come on. So you're saying there's tax dollars that would send you off for, I guess, private health care in the U.S., healthcare, use the term loosely, but to basically do a late-term abortion at our expense here for the taxpayers in Canada.
Yeah, and there's several problems with this. The first is that the majority of Americans disagree with late-term abortion.
Yeah.
Deciding the restrictions is a state-by-state thing for it's since the overturning of Roe v. Wade, it's based on what the states say. They can pass their own laws. And so different states are passing different laws. Yet here we are in Canada, keeping the doors open of these late-term abortion clinics as they're kind of figuring out what kind of restrictions and regulations they're going to be implemented. And in Colorado specifically, there was a very infamous abortionist named Dr. Hearn. He recently retired, but he was very well known for doing very late-term abortions up until the 9th month of pregnancy. And once he retired, that abortion clinic closed down, but then another one reopened just a few years ago, and they advertise right on the website that they do abortions up to 34 weeks for any reason. And so that was one of the clinics that I would have been referred to from the clinic in British Columbia. And because the Canadian government considers it essential health care, it would have been completely covered. And the travel and accommodations would not have been covered, but she said I could get some money from the National Abortion Federation, which is now called Abortion Care Canada. And if you look up government grants, Abortion Care Canada has received millions of dollars in government grants from the Liberal government, from the Trudeau Liberals as well. So, there's a lot of kind of layers, right, to different clinic visits for sure.
Well, essential health care. Yeah. Okay, well, again, we're told that the rare late-term abortions in Canada are typically medically necessary. But what did you find out in your undercover video investigation? Was that one of the criteria, the stipulations? If you want a late-term abortion, it has to be because your health's in danger, or the unborn is in danger? Well, he's obviously in danger now. I mean, what did they tell you?
Yeah, I specifically wanted to know that exact question. And so in Toronto, I asked, while she was talking about referring me to the Women's College Hospital, which is the hospital that would have done the late-term abortion, which was 10 minutes down the road. I said, sometimes you hear that you have to be at risk or your health has to be in danger. Do I have to prove that at the hospital? And she said, no, abortion care like that hasn't existed since the 1960s. And then I asked again right after that, so I don't have to prove I'm at risk or the fetus is at risk. And she said, no, absolutely not. In the Montreal clinic, at the very beginning of the visit, she said, do you have any health issues? I said, no. She said, that's great. And then went on to talk about late-term induction abortions at the hospital. So in those two situations, they very specifically and pointedly said it does not have to be for any medical necessary reason. And in Vancouver, she frankly just didn't ask. Okay. So whether they asked or not, it was not a top priority for them.
Mm-hmm. Now, do we have any information on, I don't know if we have any stats, I'm guessing we probably don't, but how many medical professionals, how many doctors would refuse to do a late-term abortion? I'm hoping most of them would. What information do we have on that?
Yeah, I mean, most provinces do have a conscientious objection clauses so that medical professionals do not have to commit procedures that are against their conscience. Referring is something entirely different. Some do have it, some don't have it. It depends. That's always the issue when these conscientious objection legislation or bills are put forward. But in general, I would say overall, the majority of healthcare professionals in Canada do have the right to say no when it comes to committing a procedure they are against. So I think in that regard, and also even, the most ardent pro-choice medical professionals do not want to commit abortions at the later stages of pregnancy. And I mean, even when some of these videos were posted, some of the responses that I got online were, I work in the hospital, I'm a nurse, I'm a doctor, this is horrific. So I do think that regardless of where medical professionals stand, it would be rather difficult to find somebody who is willing to do it so late. That being said, they still exist, and these clinics know who they are, and they refer women to those specific people when these situations arise.
I guess the question is, we have to ask ourselves, why are the majority of medical professionals and the public against a late-term abortion? What is the development level of a fetus? In 20 weeks plus gestation. Mm-hmm. Are these shapes human-like shapes, or is it far beyond that?
I mean, these are really good discussions to have, and it's a really good way to have them, is to talk about, when does life begin? And I have seen those conversations come up online, specifically from people who would identify as pro-choice. There's a lot of people who say, I'm pro-choice, and they always have a limit. There's very few people who say up until birth. Those are kind of the very, very small minority of radicals that would say that. But the majority of the online discussion has been kind of, when should there be restrictions? And the commonality of people in Canada, both in the polls and what I'm seeing online, is that they are against late-term abortion. They're against abortion after 20 weeks. And I think the main reason is because of viability, that if a baby can survive outside of the womb, that's the line for a lot of people. Like, why would you intentionally terminate the life of a baby if they can survive outside the womb? And I think that's really difficult for them to grapple with. But it does, logically, if you can lead them along to show that, dependency doesn't determine our humanity. These are, good conversations to have, and something that I think is very important, and something that frankly doesn't arise very often in Canada because we have become extremely complacent on the abortion issue.
Yes, and it begs the question here in our political parties, both provincial and federally, across the country. So if we have a majority of Canadians, and it would seem that we do, who are opposed to gender selective abortion or late term abortion, why can't we at least put some boundaries in place here, as most other nations in the world, including, left-leaning countries, have legislation prohibiting this? Why can't Canada do this?
Well, I think it's up to us to put that societal pressure on these politicians. And it does work. And we've seen this with other issues rather quickly. And I would point people to the fact that, even a few years ago, if you were going to talk about gender identity in the school system, you are automatically labeled, there's no way that politicians were going to touch it. And all it took was one premier in one province, Blaine Higgs, to put forward a piece of legislation saying, parents have to, be notified if a minor wants to change their gender, and got the discussion going, and then would not back down despite the opposition. And because of that, the next premier and the next premier and the next premier, and soon you had all these provincial pieces of legislation up until the federal level, where, when Blaine Higgs first put forward this piece of legislation, the Conservative Party of Canada leader said, this is a provincial issue, I don't want to talk about it. And then because it kept building and building and building, a few months later, when he was asked the same question, he said, no, parents have the right to know, and there needs to be parental consent, and this is wrong, and kind of had the proper talking points. And so that was an issue that escalated very quickly because of the societal pressure. And even though this is a relatively new issue, I do think that the way that we've talked about abortion in the last, few decades has been very roundabout. Like, oh, what about if a pregnant woman is killed while someone is committing a crime, or, things that aren't directly specifically talking about abortion. And I think, that's been tried and that's failed. And I think we need to kind of see where society is at right now. And society is at the place where they are against late-term abortions. It's been proven that late-term abortions do happen. So let's have public policy reflect public opinion. Let's start there, and then get that kind of ball rolling and have deeper conversations about this issue. And so I think that, I understand that it's been 40, 50 plus years that we've had, abortion on demand in Canada, but let's kind of take a breath and think about the most strategic way forward. Think about the things that haven't worked, and think about the things that could work or have worked in other countries, and kind of change strategies and go from there.
Okay, and if you're just joining in the show right now, talking with Alissa Golob, Executive Director of the Pro-Life Group Right Now. So their website, itstartsrightnow.ca. And so, yeah, this is where the politics come in, provincially and federally. So how do you, I guess let me ask you, because it's a political liability in most cases, it seems. No one wants to talk about abortion. We're going to stay a mile away from that, right? Except for a few parties here and there that typically don't seem to gain any traction, don't have any seats in Parliament or in the provincial legislatures. So how do you change that? Can a political party be changed from the inside out?
Well, yeah, I think that, losing election after election because you're solely talking about economic issues is clearly not working. There are massive cultural battles that are happening in society all across Canada, whether it's in the school system, whether it's in the hospitals, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's an end of life or beginning of life. These are the issues that people care about, and they're thirsty for a main political party to address these issues. And when the Conservative Party specifically does address these issues, they are automatically, their polling numbers automatically increase. And so it's not enough for Conservative parties to be economically conservative and socially liberal, because when you do get a new leader, like someone like the new Liberal leader who's kind of on that same page as well, then there's pretty much no differentiation between the two major parties, and therefore there's going to be no change in politics. So in order to differentiate themselves. I think that conservative people in general, and even people who belong to the Liberal Party, because I think there are opportunities there as well to kind of pass and put forward pieces of legislation and policies at both the provincial and federal level, whether it's at, conventions or AGMs, starting there, but also, encouraging caucus and members of parliament to do the same, to support and put pieces of policy within party platforms and within electoral platforms that talk about these cultural issues in a way that is popular with the Canadian people. And even though, abortion kind of gets lumped together, there is, I think, an opportunity to address late-term abortion, because the majority of Canadians are against late-term abortion. That's what the polls show.
So find a point of commonality, right?
Absolutely. And, we commissioned a polling company, One Persuasion, to do a poll a few years ago, and they found that, 61% of people who voted for the Bloc Québécois in the 2019 federal election were more likely to vote for a federal party that was going to restrict sex-selective abortion. So probably, arguably the most left-leaning people who vote for one of the most left-leaning parties are more likely to vote for a political party that would actually do something about a specific cultural issue. And I think there's a lot of opportunity that's being missed because, parties aren't addressing these issues. And I think that victory would be easy to come by if they did.
It's the challenge is finding political leaders with a chutzpah to bring these things up, right? Because the fear is that they'll lose votes and lose their seat as well.
That's already happened.
It sure has, hasn't it? So okay.
You only go up from there.
So part of what you do is you round up people to knock on doors, etc., sell memberships to parties to win nominations. So you're running a pro-life candidate to win the seat provincially or federally, and then of course if they win that nomination, then to win the seat. What kind of success rate have you had over the last few years?
Massive success. I mean, in the last couple of federal elections, we've been able to exponentially increase the number of federal politicians specifically. And now the majority of Conservative MPs are pro-life and do vote that way. And so, it's been very successful. It's very easy to get involved in the nomination process. And we specifically train pro-lifers on how to do that and how it's one of the easiest things that they can do to make a difference.
What about, I'm curious, I know the other main parties, like, I don't know if we can call the NDP a main party anymore, but, maybe that'll change. And the Liberals, they have a fairly anti-pro-life policy, it seems, in their party. I don't know what you want to call it, the way they run their party, basically. Is there a spot to, sell memberships there to get somebody nominated who might be pro-life in those groups?
I think absolutely. I mean, in the Liberal Party specifically, it was just a Trudeau policy that no pro-lifer could run for a nomination. Now that Trudeau's gone, there's nowhere in the Liberal Party that says that that's the case. So there were several Liberal pro-life MPs prior to Trudeau. So now that he's gone, hopefully that policy is gone as well. Carney seems like a much more open individual when it comes to these kinds of issues. And I think that there is opportunity to get someone who is pro-life elected in the Liberal Party. With regards to the NDP, I think it's less likely in terms of the abortion issue, but more likely in terms of the assisted suicide issue.
Right.
I think that they are some of those MPs are definitely on side with regards to not expanding assisted suicide. So just to support politicians in the best way that we can from the various parties is incredibly important. You can't put all your eggs in one basket, and that's certainly not something that we have an intention of doing at all.
Right. Okay. So if viewers are kind of pondering this, saying, should I get involved? I think a lot of time that's a significant part of the problem, is that we're hesitant to get off our couch and take the time, the effort, the money, whatever it might be, to get involved, to make a difference there. What do you find works to get people out of their own complacency here?
Well, if I, who am a mother of four, who have 4 kids under 5 years old, can go during my 3rd pregnancy and fly all across Canada and go undercover and record abortionists and release this footage, then the average person can go a couple hours a week during an election cycle and identify voters. When you knock on doors, it's extremely simple. You're not arguing with people. You don't have to memorize all these policies or kind of try and convince them that your candidate is the best candidate. The only reason why you're knocking on doors is to identify voters. So, hey, my name's Alissa. I'm a volunteer with this candidate. Can she count on your vote this election? And if they say yes, you mark it down. If they say no, and you move on. And if they ask you about any questions with regards to policy, the candidates don't actually want you to respond because they don't want you to misrepresent them. So you just say, the candidate would love to talk to you about that, and you pass on their contact information.
So relatively simple then.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
It's very, very simple, but actually makes a huge difference.
Okay. Are you getting any younger people involved here at all?
I mean, yeah, younger people love to kind of do that street activism. And, with regards to the pro-life issue, sometimes it can be difficult to talk to people about abortion. But if you still want to make a difference in the pro-life movement without having to do that, then door knocking for a political candidate is the best way forward for that.
Okay. Well, I want to encourage people to get the information off your website there. It starts right now. .ca. And I'm running out of time here, but I appreciate what you're doing to make a difference, to stand up for the unborn. They are human beings and have every right to life, just like we do. At least they should in this country. All right. Thank you so much, Alissa.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Alissa Golob, Executive Director of Right Now. Their website, it starts rightnow.ca. If you have any questions or any thoughts on this, don't hesitate to fire me off an email, paul@wiseup.ca. And again, tell your friends about us, wiseup.ca. You can watch the shows there as well. God bless.